we've spoken about Freddy Krueger, and, we've spoken about how that brought you into this. You got the opportunity to work with Robert Englund. I mean, I know you were stoked, but tell me, just tell me again
Oh my
what that.
God. I mean, it was like that's like the biggest part of my bucket list just ticked off there immediately. He was incredible. Robert was such a beautiful man, absolutely beautiful man. We met him for the first time. We did a little makeup test with him in the UK, and it's such a delight, such a dream. We spent 4 hours doing the makeup test, really taking our time. And he sat in the makeup chair, and he just, for the whole 4 hours, he was just telling us anecdotes, stories about his career, stories from Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, it doesn't get any better than this. And it was incredible. It really was. He was an absolute joy to work with.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Campbell Bower, and welcome to The Process. I am very, very, very excited to be here today talking to my friend, artistic genius, cultural legend as well, head of our special makeup effects department on Stranger Things, Mr. Barrie Gower. Barrie Gower, how are you, sir?
Hey, Jamie, how the devil are you? You okay?
Surviving. I'm here, I'm present, I'm correct. I'm very, very happy to be talking with you. First of all, congratulations on everything for the show. This is so massive. As your friend and obviously somebody who spent so much time with you, I am so happy for you and so proud of you. I know my pride means literally nothing, but I'm so, so, so happy for you. Just tell me, how does it feel now, we'll talk more about how long the process has taken and the whole journey, but how do you feel?
I think it's been overwhelming. I think since, I don't know whether it's been the same for yourself, Jamie. It's like since volume one dropped in towards the end of May, it's been I think the outpouring of love and all that. We've had so many beautiful comments through social media, through emails, through, I've had school friends I haven't seen for 25, 30 years get in touch. I've never experienced working on a project, working on a character that has given us so much amazing comments from the public. And of course, this is down to yourself as well, Jamie. I mean, the performance, I mean, I think, that the whole process, the filming, the whole journey was just a whole, it was a whole process of endurance for you, really. I mean, to spend that amount of time in a makeup chair, on a massage table, standing up, back in a makeup chair, and this, that, and the other, and then do a whole day's filming each day as well. Can I throw the question back at yourself? How have you felt the reception to your characters, I guess, in Stranger Things 4?
Same feeling. I mean, overwhelming gratitude. I feel like, as you touched on earlier, the process was a lengthy one, and given the fact that we also had the pandemic in between as well, it sort of extended that process for me as an actor. It's that same feeling of like putting in as much of yourself, or as much as I had of myself, into the work process before we even got onto set. I wanted to know, you and I have obviously spoken briefly about, your career and so on and so forth, but how did this happen for you? How did you find yourself being the Barrie Gower, the guy,
I think from an early age, I wanted to become a monster maker, I think, and get into makeup effects. But it wasn't until I was just sort of pre-teens or getting into my teens, I came across Fangoria magazine. I don't know whether you're aware of Fangoria magazine, but it's an incredible film industry magazine, which is basically blood and gore and makeup effects and how creatures and monster effects are made. I didn't know what the hell I was going to do. I didn't know there were any courses available to do stick rubber on people, do prosthetics. So I think I was applying for graphic design and set design and theatre design and things. And I just came across this course in London. It was a makeup, hair and prosthetics course. And I didn't have any experience in hair at all. So the tutor said, go away, do a year in hairdressing and come back to us next year. So I mean, talk about dedication. I went away, I enrolled on a hairdressing course, and I shampooed and set old Biddy's hair and perms for about a year, and came back the following year. I'd made some masks and bits and pieces, and finally got into this course. I think they just took pity on me, gave me a place on the course, and at the time it was like only one of two courses in London which did prosthetics. And I guess it's probably very similar to acting as well. It's like you find that there are very small communities, and everybody knows everybody. And in makeup effects, there's only a handful of companies in Britain that do this. And I just sort of slowly but surely just hoard my way around the makeup effects community and worked for all the different prosthetics designers. I worked for a friend, Waldo Mason, on an Edgar Wright movie called The World's End. And I met a makeup designer called Jane Walker. And after we finished on that project, she rang me about a year later to say, I've been approached to do Game of Thrones. My wife, Sarah, and I would literally just set up our fledgling company, which at the time was my garage in the back garden. And I was doing a few little films and makeups out of there. And we went for this interview. It was in Northern Ireland, and I was going up against all my peers, and I'm like, nah, whatever, this will be, good experience. And we managed to get the gig. So really, even though I'd spent 15, 20 years or so as a freelancer working for lots of different companies, that was our first big challenge as a company, really.
What are you doing in here, Max? Come back to me. How do you like them, Max? Would you like to join them?
We've been fortunate to be involved with some really incredible projects. And I think Stranger Things is like the perfect example of that, because we got an email out of the blue, and this was from Ian Patterson, the producer. And he said, I'm working on Stranger Things, and Matt and Ross would like to talk to you about a character. And then we had our first meeting with Matt and Ross, and Michael Mayer, the VFX supervisor and incredible concept artist. At that point, we couldn't believe that approached a team outside of the US, actually. And it wasn't until we were speaking to them that they were saying the reasons for getting in touch were they were after this iconic villain. They loved our work on The Night King, but they loved all the radiation burns and the effects that we did on Chernobyl. And it's almost like a combination of the two. This was without seeing any concept art. And we were like, okay. And they were saying, we were saying, this is the kind of thing we want. Why don't we just approach the people who did it? So that's kind of how we got the gig, really. So we were obviously over the moon, but our daughter Lottie was probably more excited than us, because she's like a massive Stranger Things fan. I mean, how were you first approached about the role, and what? I've heard you talk in a couple of interviews about they gave you a couple of different script pages from two different films.
So after I'd done those first two tapings, the first thing I was asked to do were these two sort of separate sides, this Hellraiser thing and from Primal Fear, and then the dummy sides from the show. I was called back to Los Angeles around sort of January. Yeah, it was like January 2020. Yeah, January 2020, saying Matt and Ross want to meet you. So I came back to LA. And you might have heard me sort of speak about this, but I made this you've seen parts of it, that mood board, that that Vecna mood
Incredible.
board. And I made that in my apartment just because I was so inspired, you know, like I was so inspired by just even the small bits of material that I had been given, and knowing the show, I was like, this just feels to me like I get to now like explore a world. Like, how much fun is this? So I went to the house that they have, that they write in here, and I remember walking into the house, and there was a sort of team of people, young people, who I think are sort of part of the writing team, or like just work with Matt and Ross, and I was like, oh, I'm here to see Matt and Ross. They were like, oh, absolutely, come with me. Sort of was led downstairs into this room that sort of overlooked all of this, you know, expansive Los Angeles skyline. And I sort of remember just standing in the room, looking out the window, being like, this is so amazing. This is just wild. What's going on right now? And then I took a seat, and I was given some water because clearly I looked pale. And then Matt and Ross came in, and they were just very, very excited. They you know what they can be like. They can be very quiet, but they can also just be very, very talkative. And then sort of towards the latter part of our conversation, I was like, hey, look, I've done this booklet that I think, you know, might be kind of what you're looking for, because they hadn't really spoken about the look for Vecna. They said this is the big bad for this season, and we really want to have a human. And I was sort of trying to piece it all together in my mind without having seen anything visually.
Had they explained to you how extensive the makeup process could be at all?
No. I mean, I as far as memory serves, I don't think so. Not at this point in the conversation. And so I was like, hey, have a look at this. And like, you know, I had some of Nick's work in there, obviously from Rafe as Voldemort, you know, and like I had Christopher Lee in there. I had Doug Bradley as Pinhead in there. I even had, you know, It was in there as well, and just some other sort of like more abstract references. And they looked at it and they were like, have you read the script? And I was like, no, gentlemen, like all I've got is what you've given me. And they were like, 1 second. Went off into the back room and then bought those sort of renders that you obviously had already started to see. And then I think at that point they were like, how do you feel about being sat down for 8.5 hours? You know, this could be a very lengthy process. I'm like, honestly, I'm just very excited. Like, yes, anything.
Who's Vecna?
An undead creature of great power.
A spellcaster.
A dark wizard.
It's rare you work on a project and you have very little critical feedback actually from the creatives. And Matt and Ross were really happy with what we were doing. I don't know whether it was just because there was a transparency and we were constantly talking about it and talking to VFX and how we wanted the return on the vines, and this goes around the arm and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, that design was very, very elongated and stretched. And we were saying, you know, it doesn't matter who the human is you're going to put this on, they're not going to be that elongated and stretched. So we had a few compromises along the way, but there weren't many really. And I think it wasn't, I think the only thing we changed during the whole build of Vecna was when it was about 2 weeks before we did the camera test with you in Atlanta in November. Matt and Ross said, can we just do a quick test in the workshop? Can you wear the glove and put it onto somebody's head and see how feasible this will be for Jamie to make it look like his fingers are penetrating somebody's skull? And I know there were all these conversations of your left hand being maybe digital a lot of the time as well, but they wanted to see what we could achieve practically. And at that point we did it. And it's sad because when we did the makeup test with you in the UK and you were doing this most beautiful movement with your hands. I always remember your fingers looking like this kind of funnel web spider, the way they kind of coiled around. But as soon as we tried this on a live cast, actually, we knew it wasn't going to work. So at that point, they were saying, can we just take the fingers down? And I think we took them down about 6 inches maybe, because I know they were ridiculously long to start off with, and I think we took them down so far.
I wanted to just dive a little bit further into the sort of aesthetic process and more of the creative process of the design of Vecna in general. I've had people come up to me, or I've been in interview situations and people have mentioned the tendrils, you know, and they say there's something so interesting about that, because that for me, this I'm speaking as the interviewer now, but they would say, you know, that for me reminds me so much of like the dreadlocks in Predator, you know, and it's little things like that that always fascinate me.
It was interesting because they were also very open for us to contribute our thoughts, and you know, that there were nuances, there were parts of the structure and the form of the sculpture we altered slightly, and then when it came to the color scheme, we used Michael's design, but as a palette, but we also used a lot of our own reference as well. But I think there were key things. I mean, things like the tendrils were actually very strong key points to Michael's design, which I think are, I mean, to employ that practically into a makeup is not only is it a bit of a challenge, but I think it is visually stunning as well. I think the movement when you turn your neck, there's some gorgeous shots, especially in the snowball, but there's some gorgeous shots actually in episode 4 when I think you turn to Sadie, or you turn behind when I think the hole opens up, and you know, I think that the vines move beautifully. They sort of retract and stretch really well, and I think really for us it was to make the shapes and forms very strong, very dynamic, but to also not only incorporate all the shapes, forms, textures, and colors from the world of the Upside Down and Stranger Things, because it had to be very in keeping. There had to be a continuity of what we've seen in the previous 3 seasons. But I think also there needed to be an added element of realism as well. And we looked at reference of, I've said this many times actually in interviews, but we were looking at reference. We've got like books in the workshop of animal anatomy and like sea life and all these translucent sort of fish and beautiful colors. And we were looking at a lot of translucencies and that sort of quality to skins. And you know, we wanted to follow the design and have this patch on your chest and a pale area on your head, and the right arm less so mutated. But you know, the patches on your chest, we wanted a remnants of what this character once was, being human, and with this kind of pale anemic sort of feel to it. And your movement and your stance and your voice as well. I mean, I don't think they've done much to your voice in the edit. I mean, that was your voice. I mean, how did you come up with the voice? Was the voice and like the movements of Vecna and, you know, his whole presence, is that something that they were very clear to you about, or is that something that you used that time and you were able to develop yourself during the lockdown period?
Chrissy, wake up now! Chrissy!
Don't cry, Chrissy. It's time.
The voice took a minute, you know. In the script, when I first got episode 1, and even at the read through in March as well, right before that first like Chrissy comes out, it says this like deep, booming, reverberated voice just like cuts through, and that's all we hear before we see Vecna in his entirety. And so I was like, well, that's the starting point. Like, that's where I have to begin. It's got to be this sort of like otherworldly weirdness. I started off in this like Freddy Krueger-esque kind of world, with it being a bit more nasal, a bit more gravelly, like more sort of like classic monster voice. And then I remember being at the read through, and I'd done some work on it, but I remember being at the read through and doing it, and I was like, that's not landing. That's not quite right yet. I need to work a bit more on it. And I think part of that is like, that's just process, it takes a minute sometimes for things to get to exactly, I mean, you mentioned the hand, right up until the point that we're filming, there's possible changes with the hand, it's just that work that is required in order to get to the place. Art is never finished, merely abandoned. So like, I've loved that so much. So I was like, right, I'm going to go home and I'm just going to like keep plowing on at this. And I think, hearing Doug Bradley as Pinhead was a really good start for me. And I always saw Vecna as this like very considered, very manipulative, intelligent being. Like I knew Henry was that, but as I knew more sort of about Vecna first of all, almost. So I was like, okay, so everything that he says matters. He's not rushing through this. This isn't a joke to him, and he's actually quite enjoying it. Like he's quite liking. Yeah, it's nasty. So it was more about just kind of like relaxing the larynx, like getting into the stomach, and then feeling it, just being able to like fully inhabit it, so that when it came time to filming, it was like, it was there, it was immediately accessible. One thing that I found really interesting as well was like, with the prosthetic on, like it's all very well and good being sat there in your own skin, wearing clothes where they're, a couple, a millimeter or two of thickness, but a prosthetic is quite thick. And as an actor and as a person, I felt like there were points where I really had to like push the energy from outside of my physical being, so that it sort of permeated through the prosthetic. And also add into that the fact that particularly something like the Mind Layer set is so big. So I walked onto that set and I was like, damn, this is huge. Like I really have to own this space. I can't hide. No hiding.
I was going to say, and slippy as well. It was incredibly slippy.
Yes, I feel like it's important for everyone to know that there was a point at which, when Sadie Sink, who plays Max, is pulling out one of the tendrils in episode 4, I have to step backwards, and I took a step backwards, and the shock that came out of Barrie and Duncan and Nick's and everyone's voice. They weren't worried about me, FYI. They were worried about the prosthetic, and everyone was like, yes, we're still rolling. Not used in the final show, but yeah, very, very slippy.
I hope we get to work together again on the next season, and you won't tell them to do it all CGI, because you don't want to sit in the chair for that long. So let's see what happens.
No, it would be my pleasure to be back in that chair with you. Just adding to that, I think this job like just really attracts like the best people. It really, really does. And we're fortunate now to be working in a time where the best people are the ones that continue to work. But there is something so special about being a part of this team, and it always feels like when we're on this set that it's just a team effort from all of us. So I thank you for that, but it feels so natural to me. I couldn't be any other way, and I wouldn't want to be any other way. But thank you. I've got one last question for you. If you can tell us, what's next, Mr. Barrie Gower? What's happening? What are you doing apart from just surviving?
We wrapped on a show about a month and a half ago called The Last of Us for HBO, which is based on a huge video game by Neil Druckmann. And then we've not long started on the second season of the Lord of the Rings TV show. So that will be keeping us off the streets for the next year or so on that season. But they're fully aware that we'll be running in tandem. fingers crossed with Stranger Things season 5. So it's our plate's pretty full, but we're just very fortunate to be involved in some incredible projects. Saying back to yourself, Jamie, I mean, have you got things lined up? Are you able to talk about things, or?
I'm not able to talk about anything yet. I have a film that I'm beginning in October, which is just incredibly exciting. And again, it's one of those things that just feels so right. And I was so electrified by the phone call that I had, and then the subsequent meeting that I had. So I will be very excited to talk about that. I'll be out in the desert. I'll say that much. I'm going to the desert for some time, which will be great. And then working on music, for me, I like to put 100% of myself in, and it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality. So for me, I generally, I'm looking now in this stage of my life to sort of put my all into maybe 2 projects a year, 2 big film projects, or like 1 television show and 1 big film project, and then work on, more creative stuff, whether that be writing my own features or working on music. That to me is the ideal. But yeah, look, dude, as a friend and as a collaborator, seriously, massive congratulations to you and everyone at BGFX for the nomination and for just creating something that, as far as people have told me and the way that they see it, it stands up against the Freddys of this world, the Pinheads of these world. This is apparently a truly iconic character. So y'all should feel very, very, very proud of yourselves.
Thank you, Jamie. Bless your heart. Yeah, we're all a little overwhelmed with the Emmy nomination. I think we're super stoked to be nominated in that category this year. It's ridiculously high competition this year. There's some amazing shows, amazing artists and work out there as well. So we're really chuffed to have got our nomination. So wishing you the best of luck, sir. And
you deserve it. You absolutely deserve it. Well done.